Princess Zarathai stood at the tall windows of the throne room, watching another spacecraft descend toward the palace landing platform. This would be suitor number 847. She didn't bother counting anymore. Her attendants kept track of that depressing number for her. 3 full cycles had passed since her father declared it was time for her to choose a consort, and every single candidate had walked away rejected within the first hour of meeting her. The Galactic Council was losing patience. She could hear it in their transmissions, see it in the tight expressions of the diplomats who visited her father. The Valorum Empire was one of the oldest civilizations in the known galaxy, and their throne had never gone this long without securing an heir. Political alliances were fraying. Trade agreements hung in uncertain balance. 6 entire sectors waited to see who would stand beside her when she eventually took the crown. Her father, Emperor Thoran, entered the chamber with that same weary expression he wore these days. He loved her. She never doubted that, but she could see the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. An empire of trillions couldn't wait forever on one princess's mysterious standards. "Zarathai, please," he said quietly, approaching her at the window. "Just tell me what you're looking for. Is it strength? Wisdom? Kindness? Give me something to work with, and I'll find candidates who meet your requirements." She turned to face him. This father who had ruled justly for 2 centuries, who had never forced a hand even as the pressure mounted. "I've told you, father, I will know them when I see them." "But what does that mean?" Frustration crept into his voice despite his efforts to remain calm. "The Krylon warlord we're meeting today has united 17 warring clans through diplomacy alone. The Centauri prince last week could calculate hyperspace routes in his head. The Vex ambassador before him had composed symphonies that made hardened soldiers weep. What more could you possibly want?" Zarathai looked back out the window. How could she explain something she barely understood herself? There was a quality she was searching for, something essential that every suitor so far had lacked. She felt its absence like a missing piece in a puzzle, but she couldn't name it. "I need someone who sees what needs to be seen," she said finally. "Someone who acts when action is needed, without calculating the personal cost first." Her father sighed. "That describes half the military commanders in the Empire." "No," Zarathai said softly. "It doesn't, but I can't explain it better than that." Down in the maintenance corridors, far below the throne room, Ben Torres pushed his cleaning cart through the servant passages. He had worked at the palace for almost 2 years now, ever since the human delegation had negotiated work contracts for Earth citizens throughout this sector. The pay was decent, the hours were long, and most days he was invisible to everyone who mattered. He didn't mind being invisible. It gave him time to think, to listen to music, to observe the incredible diversity of life that passed through these halls. He'd grown up in a small town in Arizona, never imagining he'd end up light years from Earth, mopping floors in an alien palace. Life had a funny way of taking unexpected turns. His supervisor had assigned him to the throne room level today. Another suitor was arriving, which meant the ceremonial halls needed to be spotless. Ben had been present for dozens of these courtship visits by now, always working quietly in the background while alien royalty tried to impress the princess. He'd seen princes who could manipulate gravity with their minds, warriors who had conquered entire planets, diplomats who spoke 40 languages fluently. Every single one of them left looking confused and rejected. Ben honestly felt bad for Princess Zarathai. The few times he'd seen her up close, always from a respectful distance, she'd looked exhausted. There was a loneliness in her eyes that reminded him of his mother during her last years, when she'd been searching for something she couldn't quite name. His mom had been a nurse at the county hospital, working double shifts, always putting everyone else first. She'd passed away just before he took this job, and sometimes he wondered if she'd be proud of where he'd ended up or disappointed he wasn't doing something more significant with his life. He pushed those thoughts aside and focused on his work. The throne room's floors were made of some crystalline material that showed every speck of dust. He'd learned the right solution to use, the proper technique to make them shine without leaving streaks. It was simple work, honest work, and there was something satisfying about taking pride in doing it well. Above him, through the vents, he could hear voices echoing from the throne room. The new suitor had arrived. Ben glanced at his schedule. He'd need to clean the ceremonial vase gallery next, but he'd wait until after the meeting concluded. No point in disturbing important diplomatic proceedings just to dust some ancient artifacts. He settled onto a bench in the corridor, pulled out his phone, and queued up some Mozart. Might as well take his break now. He had a feeling this meeting would be just as short as all the others. The Krylon warlord entered the throne room with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. His name was Gormuth, and he stood nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms and skin that shimmered like polished obsidian. Behind him, 3 advisors carried gifts wrapped in precious metals and rare crystals from the outer reaches of the galaxy. Ben had finished his break and was now working in the ceremonial vase gallery, just adjacent to the throne room. The doors stood open as they always did during official visits, allowing him to hear everything while he carefully dusted the ancient artifact that lined the walls. These vases were older than human civilization, each one a priceless relic from civilizations that had risen and fallen millennia ago. He tried not to listen too closely to the proceedings, but sound carried easily through the massive chamber. Gormuth was listing his accomplishments in a booming voice that seemed designed to echo impressively off the walls. 17 clans united, 42 worlds brought into peaceful alliance, a fleet of 7,000 ships under his command. Princess Zarathai was responding with polite, measured words. Ben had heard this pattern before. She was being diplomatic, gracious even, but there was a flatness in her tone that meant this meeting would end like all the others. Ben focused on his wake, carefully lifting a particularly ancient vase from its pedestal to clean beneath it. This one was his favorite. Simple blue ceramic with hand-painted scenes of some long-dead artist's daily life. No precious gems, no gold inlay, just honest craftsmanship from someone who had lived and loved and created something beautiful thousands of years ago. Back in the throne room, Gormuth was moving closer to where Zarathai stood, gesturing expansively with all 4 arms as he described his vision for their combined empires. Too expansively, as it turned out. One of his lower arms swept outward in a grand gesture and connected solidly with a pedestal near the wall. The ceremonial vase atop it, a tall crystalline piece that supposedly dated back to the founding of the Valorum dynasty, tipped forward and began to fall. Ben's head snapped up at the sound. His body moved before his brain fully registered what was happening. He dropped the vase he was holding back onto its cloth and sprinted toward the throne room. A servant girl named Kira stood frozen directly in the path where the crystal vase would shatter, shards exploding outward at dangerous speeds. Ben covered the distance in 4 long strides and dove forward, his hands outstretched. He caught the vase awkwardly against his chest, momentum carrying him into a roll that put his body between the artifact and Kira. He ended up on his back, breathing hard, the vase clutched safely against his uniform. The throne room went absolutely silent. Ben's brain finally caught up with his body. He'd just interrupted a formal royal courtship. He'd just inserted himself into a diplomatic proceeding between a princess and a warlord. He was holding a priceless ceremonial object while lying on the polished floor in his janitor's uniform. "Oh, God," he breathed. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. He carefully set the vase down and scrambled to his feet, his face burning with embarrassment. "I apologize, Your Highness. I shouldn't have interfered." Gormuth's expression had transformed from shock to outrage. His 4 arms flexed, and his voice came out in a dangerous growl. This creature days interrupt? This lowly servant presumed to enter the presence of royalty uninvited. He turned to Emperor Thoran. "I demand his immediate execution for this insult to my honor and to your house." Ben felt his stomach drop. Execution. He'd just been trying to keep someone from getting hurt, and now he was going to die for it. But Princess Zarathai had stood up from her throne. She moved with sudden purpose, crossing the room in smooth, quick strides. Ben instinctively wanted to step back, to bow, to make himself smaller, but something in her expression held him frozen in place. She stopped directly in front of him, so close he could see the intricate patterns in her eyes, colors that didn't have names for swirling and complex designs. She studied his face for a long moment, then looked down at his hands. They were still shaking slightly, callous from years of manual work, with a small cut on one knuckle from where he'd scraped it against the floor during his dive. Her gaze moved past him to where Kira stood, still shocked and unharmed, then back to the vase, resting safely on the floor. Finally, her eyes returned to Ben's face. "Why did you risk yourself for an object?" she asked. Her English was perfect, with barely a trace of accent. "It's just a vase. Why would you endanger your life to save it?" Ben blinked, confused by the question. I wasn't thinking about the vase, Your Highness. He glanced over at Kira, who was staring at him with wide eyes. I just didn't want anyone to get hurt. The crystal, when it shatters, the pieces fly everywhere. Kira was standing right there, and I just reacted. Something changed in Princess Zarathai's expression. It was like watching sunrise over a landscape, warmth spreading across features that had been carefully neutral moments before. She turned slowly to face her father, and when she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the entire chamber. This one, she said, he passes. Emperor Thoran leaned forward in his throne, his eyes widening. Zarathai, what are you? This human, she said, and there was something like wonder in her voice now. He is the one I've been waiting for. Ben's mind went blank. The princess had just said, what? He must have misheard. There was no way she meant. Gormith exploded with rage. This is an outrage. A human? A janitor? You reject me, Gormith the Uniter, for a creature that scrubs your floors. But Zarathai wasn't listening to him anymore. She was still looking at Ben, and for the first time in 3 cycles, she was smiling. The Galactic Council chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives from 40 different species were shouting simultaneously, their translation devices creating a cacophony of overlapping protests. Some were banging their appendages on the table. Others had turned colors that Ben's research later told him indicated extreme agitation in their cultures. Ben stood in the center of it all, still wearing his maintenance uniform because nobody had given him time to change. Princess Zarathai stood beside him, calm and unmoved by the storm of outrage swirling around them. Her father sat at the head of the council table, one hand pressed against his forehead, looking like he had aged a decade in the past hour. This is madness, declared a crystalline being whose name Ben couldn't pronounce. The Valorum line is the oldest royal house in the galaxy. You cannot seriously propose joining it with a human janitor. Humans barely have warp capability, added another council member, a floating jellyfish-like creature. They've been part of galactic society for less than 50 cycles. This is absurd. A reptilian diplomat slammed what passed for his fist on the table. We have princes, generals, scholars, and artists from the most distinguished families in the galaxy. 847 of them have been rejected, and you choose a maintenance worker? What possible reason could justify this decision? Zarathai let them vent their frustration. She had expected this reaction. When the chamber finally quieted enough for her voice to carry, she spoke with the authority of someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire life. I will tell you the reason, she said. But first, you must understand what you think you know about the Valorum Empire. You believe we are an old civilization that has survived through diplomatic skill and strategic alliances. You think our longevity is a result of careful governance and advanced technology. You are wrong. That got their attention. The chamber went quiet. Emperor Thoran looked at his daughter with concern. Zarathai, are you certain you want to reveal? They need to understand, father, otherwise they will never accept what must happen. She turned back to the council. The Valorum Empire has survived for millennia because we are not rulers. We are guardians. 50,000 years ago, an entity was imprisoned at the galactic core, a being of pure psychic energy that feeds on specific emotional frequencies, indifference, cruelty, calculated selfishness. The kind of cold-hearted thinking that puts personal gain above all else. Ben listened, his mind racing. This was not what he had expected to hear. The entity cannot be destroyed, Zarathai continued. It can only be contained by a barrier that must be constantly maintained by the royal family. This is why we exist. This is a true burden of the Valorum throne. And the barrier requires something very specific to remain strong. It requires the active, conscious intention to protect life, not for personal benefit, but simply because protecting life is a right thing to do. She began pacing now, her voice growing more intense. For 3 cycles, I have been testing every suitor who came before me. Not testing their accomplishments or their intelligence or their strength. Testing their instincts. Their automatic responses when they thought no one important was watching. Ben's breath caught. He suddenly understood what she was about to say. During every courtship, Zarathai explained, I arranged small incidents. A servant would stumble while carrying something heavy. A child would wander too close to a dangerous piece of machinery. An attendant would show signs of distress. Small things, easy to notice if you were paying attention to the people around you rather than focusing entirely on impressing me. The council members had gone very still. Every single prince, every warlord, every distinguished shooter ignored these moments. They were too busy showcasing their achievements, calculating how to win my favor, thinking about what they would gain from this alliance. Not one of them stopped mid-sentence to help someone who needed help. Not one of them acted without first considering the political implications of their actions. She turned to look at Ben, and her expression softened. And then I watched this human catch a falling vase not to save a priceless artifact, but because a servant girl might be injured by the shards. He didn't think about it. He didn't calculate the risk to himself versus the benefit of the action. He just moved. His body reacted before his brain could tell him all the reasons why he shouldn't get involved. Ben felt dozens of alien eyes turning toward him. He wanted to disappear into the floor. I have spent 3 cycles studying humans, Zarathai said. Your species fascinates me. You are not the strongest in the galaxy. Your technology is primitive compared to most civilizations here. Your lifespans are brief. Your bodies are fragile. And yet you have this extraordinary trait. You help each other automatically. You see someone in trouble, and something in your nature compels you to act. Not all humans, certainly, but enough that it seems to be built into your species at a fundamental level. A small, bird-like council member spoke up, their voice skeptical. Many species help each other. Altruism is not unique to humans. True, Zarathai acknowledged, but most species' altruism is calculated. It operates within social contracts, family groups, or hierarchies. Humans seem to have this unusual tendency to help complete strangers, even members of other species, even when there is no possible benefit to themselves. They will stop on roadsides to help people they will never see again. They will donate money to causes in countries they will never visit. They will jump into dangerous situations to save lives without stopping to think about the personal cost. She looked back at Ben. I watched this human spend 2 years working in our palace. I have seen him stay late to help other maintenance workers finish their shifts. I have seen him give his lunch to a hungry kitchen assistant. I have seen him fix broken equipment that wasn't his responsibility because someone else needed it to work. Small acts, unremarkable acts, but consistent, automatic. He does these things because helping others is just what he does. Emperor Thoran spoke quietly, and this is what the barrier needs. Yes, Zarathai said. The entity of the galactic core feeds on selfishness and indifference. It grows stronger when beings act only for personal gain, when they calculate costs and benefits before deciding whether to help others. The barrier is maintained by the opposite intention, the genuine, instinctive desire to protect life simply because life deserves protection. This is what I need in a consort. This is why I choose him. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Finally, the crystalline council members spoke again, their tone more respectful now. If what you say is true, Princess, then the fate of trillions rests on this human's character. It does, Zarathai agreed, which is why I had to be absolutely certain. Ben found his voice at last. Your Highness, I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. I'm just a janitor. I'm not special. I'm not qualified for. You are exactly what we need. Zarathai interrupted gently. The question is whether you are willing. Ben sat alone in the guest quarters they had given him, staring out at a sky filled with 3 moons and constellations he still didn't recognize after 2 years. His hands were shaking. He'd been sitting here for 6 hours, and his hands still wouldn't stop shaking. A princess had chosen him, an actual alien princess who guarded some kind of psychic prison at the center of the galaxy, and she expected him to help her do it. Him, Ben Torres, who had barely graduated high school, who had spent the last 2 years mopping floors and unclogging toilets on an alien space station. There was a bowl of fruit on the table beside him. At least, he thought it was fruit. Some of it glowed softly in colors that hurt his eyes if he looked too long. He hadn't touched any of it. He hadn't eaten anything since the council meeting. His stomach felt like it was tied in knots. A chime sounded at the door. Before Ben could respond, it opened, and 3 Valorum advisors entered. They wore elaborate robes that seemed to shift colors as they moved, and they looked at Ben the way his high school guidance counselor used to look at him, like a problem that needed fixing. Ben Torres, the tallest one, said, checking a holographic display. We have been reviewing your genetic profile and educational background. There is much work to be done. Work? Ben echoed. Obviously you cannot stand beside Princess Zarathai in your current state. Another advisor said briskly. We have prepared a comprehensive enhancement program. Genetic modifications to extend your lifespan, neural implants to accelerate learning, physical augmentation to improve your strength and resilience. We can also provide immediate education downloads, political theory, galactic history, diplomatic protocol, 17 major languages. The third advisor stepped forward with what looked like a medical scanner. The process will take approximately 4 weeks. You will emerge dramatically improved, more suitable for your new role. Ben stood up from his chair. You want to change me. Improve you, the first advisor corrected. Surely you understand that a human janitor cannot simply become royal consort without significant modification. This is for your benefit as much as the Empire's. Something in Ben's chest tightened. He thought about his mother, about the night she came home from double shifts at the hospital, exhausted but still taking time to help him with his homework. She'd never had fancy education or special abilities. She'd just been herself, helping people because that's who she was. No, Ben said quietly. The advisors looked at each other. I'm sorry, the tall one said. No genetic modifications. No neural implants. No downloads. Ben's voice was steadier now. If Princess Zarathai chose me, she chose me as I am, not some upgraded version. Just me. That's absurd, the second advisor sputtered. You cannot possibly. The door chimed again. This time it was Zarathai herself who entered. The advisors immediately bowed and backed away. She looked at Ben, then at the advisors, then at the medical equipment they brought. Out, she said simply. But Your Highness, we were only... Out, now. The advisors gathered their equipment and left quickly. When the door closed behind them, Zarathai turned to Ben. I apologize. They mean well, but they don't understand. Understand what? Ben asked. That changing you would defeat the entire purpose. She moved to the window and looked out at the moons. I don't need someone who has been modified to be better. I need someone who is genuine. Someone whose instincts haven't been altered by enhancements or programming. She glanced back at him. You said no to them. Good. Ben ran his hand through his hair. Your Highness, I appreciate what you're trying to do here, but I think you're making a mistake. I'm not special. Back on Earth, there are millions of people just like me. Billions, probably. People who help each other out, who do the right thing when they can. I'm not unique. I know, Zarathai said, and there was something sad in her voice. That's what makes your species so remarkable. This quality I need, it's not rare among humans. It's ordinary, common. That's what the rest of the galaxy doesn't understand about your people yet. She sat down in the chair across from him. Without her formal robes, without the crown, she looked younger, tired. Ben, I need to be honest with you. The council gave you 1 week to decide, and that's true. You can leave whenever you want. No one will stop you. But I need you to understand what you'll be walking away from. The fate of trillions, Ben said, trying for humor but not quite achieving it. My fate, Zarathai said quietly. If I cannot find a suitable consort, I will have to maintain the barrier alone. It's possible. My ancestors have done it before. But it takes a tremendous amount of psychic energy. Maintaining it alone will slowly drain my life force. I would have perhaps 50 years instead of the 300 I might otherwise live. And during those years, I would have to remain at the galactic core, never leaving, constantly focused on the barrier. Ben stared at her. You've been carrying this burden for 3 cycles, knowing that if you couldn't find the right person, you'd have to sacrifice your entire life. It's my duty, she said simply. The entity cannot be allowed to escape. If the barrier fails, it would spread throughout the galaxy, feeding on the worst impulses of every species, amplifying hatred and cruelty until civilizations tore themselves apart. Compared to that, my life is a small price. Ben thought about that. A princess who could have chosen any of 847 accomplished shooters, but refused to settle for someone who didn't meet the one requirement that actually mattered, who was willing to sacrifice everything rather than compromise on what the galaxy needed. Can I ask you something? Ben said, Of course. Why did you study humans? I mean, specifically, out of all the species in the galaxy, why did you focus on us? Zarathai smiled slightly. 5 cycles ago, a human diplomatic vessel had an accident near our space. Their engines failed. Life support was failing. They sent out a distress call. Our nearest ship was 3 hours away. But there was a civilian transport in the area, a cargo hauler with barely functional equipment. The captain was a human woman named Rita Chen. She diverted to help, even though her ship wasn't equipped for rescue operations and the debris field was dangerous. Ben listened intently. She managed to save 14 of the 17 crew members, Zarathai continued, but her own ship was damaged in the process. When our vessel finally arrived, we asked her why she had risked her life and her cargo for strangers. Do you know what she said? What? She said, What else was I supposed to do? They needed help. Zarathai's eyes met Ben's, as if there was no choice at all, as if helping was simply automatic. That's when I began studying your species, and I found that story repeated over and over. Humans running into burning buildings. Humans diving into floods. Humans giving up their own safety for complete strangers. Not always, not every human, but often enough that it seemed to be part of your nature. She stood up and walked to the door, then paused. You have 1 week. Ben, use it to explore, to think, to decide. Whatever you choose, I won't hold it against you. Protecting the galaxy is my responsibility, not yours. After she left, Ben sat in silence for a long time. Then he got up, left the guest quarters, and went to find someone who could help him understand what he was really being asked to do. Over the next 6 days, Ben traveled through the Valorum Empire with a guide Zarathai had assigned him, an older diplomat named Kelvin who had served 3 emperors. Kelvin showed him the reality of what the Valorum protected. They visited a hospital planet where doctors from 30 species worked together to cure diseases. They stopped at a colony world where refugees from a civil war were being given new homes. They toured a station where scientists collaborated on technology that will provide clean water to drought-stricken worlds. The Valorum maintained stability, Kelvin explained as they watched children of a dozen different species playing together in a park. Not through force, but through careful diplomacy and the reminder that we are all connected, that what harms one of us eventually harms all of us. And if the entity escapes? Ben asked. Kelvin was quiet for a moment. I am old enough to remember the history from before the entity was imprisoned. Whole sectors consumed by conflict. Species that had been allies for centuries turning on each other. Not because of resources or territory, but because the entity fed their worst impulses until cooperation became impossible. It took thousands of years to build what we have now. The entity could unravel it in less than 1. On the 6th day, Ben asked to speak with Zarathai privately. They met in a garden on one of the palace levels, surrounded by plants from 100 different worlds. I talked to my dad yesterday, Ben said. Video call back to Earth. Told him everything. What did he say? He asked me what my mom would have done. Ben smiled sadly. She passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. She was a nurse, worked at the county hospital for 23 years. Never made much money, never got famous, never did anything that would make the history books. But she helped people every single day. It's just who she was. Zarathai waited. She used to tell me that helping people wasn't about recognition or reward. It was about noticing when something needed doing and doing it. Noticing when someone needed help and helping them. She said the world worked better when people just looked out for each other, not because they expected something back, but because that's how communities survive. Ben looked up at the alien sky, at stars he was still learning the names of. I think she would tell me that this is just a bigger version of what she did every day. A bigger community, but the same principle. He turned to Zarathai. I'm not saying yes because I think I'm special or because I want to be important. I'm saying yes because you need help, and I can help, and that's reason enough. That's what my mom taught me. For the first time since he'd met her, Princess Zarathai's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you, Ben." The ceremony wasn't what anyone expected. The Galactic Council had prepared for something grand. Thousands of guests, diplomatic delegations from every major civilization, weeks of celebration and formal protocols. What they got instead was Princess Zarathai and Ben Torres standing in front of the Galactic Core Containment Chamber, witnessed only by Emperor Thoran and a handful of royal guards. "This isn't a coronation," Zarathai had explained to the confused council members. "This is a working ceremony. The barrier must be reinforced, and we cannot wait for political pageantry." Ben stood in his maintenance uniform. He'd asked for formal robes, but Zarathai had shaken her head. "Wear what feels honest to you," she'd said. So he wore his work clothes, freshly cleaned, with a ceremonial sash they'd insisted on draped over one shoulder as a concession to tradition. The containment chamber was nothing like he'd imagined. He'd pictured something massive and mechanical, all technology and force fields. Instead, it was a simple circular room carved from dark stone, empty except for a crystal pillar in the center that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light. The walls were covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly, not because they were bright, but because they seemed to exist in more dimensions than his brain could process. "The entity is beyond that barrier," Zarathai said quietly, gesturing to the pillar. "It cannot take physical form, but it can influence minds. It whispers at anyone who comes too close, offering power, promising satisfaction, feeding on selfishness and cruelty." Ben could feel something even standing this far away, a pressure at the edges of his thoughts, like someone trying to find a crack to slip through. It made his skin crawl. "What does it say?" he asked. "Different things to different people," Zarathai replied. "It tells you what you want to hear, that you deserve more, that others are keeping you from what's rightfully yours, that caring about anyone except yourself is weakness." She looked at him seriously. "When we join the barrier, it will try to break through your thoughts. You need to hold on to why you're here. Hold on to what matters to you." Emperor Thoran stepped forward, carrying a simple wooden box. Inside were two identical bands made of a metal Ben didn't recognize, not quite silver, not quite blue, shifting between states as the light hit it. "These are not wedding rings," the Emperor explained. "They are psychic anchors. They will connect you both to the barrier and to each other. Once you put them on, you will feel each other's intentions, sense each other's emotional states. There is no privacy in this bond, no hiding what you truly feel. This is why the choice of consort is so critical. You must be able to trust each other completely." Ben swallowed hard. No privacy. That was terrifying in a way he hadn't fully considered. But he'd made his choice. He picked up one of the bands and slipped it onto his finger. The effect was immediate. He could feel Zarathai's presence in his mind. Not her thoughts exactly, but her emotional landscape. Determination, yes, but also fear, loneliness, hope, and underneath it all, a bone-deep exhaustion from carrying this burden alone for so long. Zarathai put on her band and gasped slightly. Ben realized she was feeling his emotions too, his nervousness, his doubt, but also his resolve, his memory of his mother, his simple, stubborn belief that helping people was just what you did. "Are you ready?" she asked. Ben nodded. Together, they approached the crystal pillar. The moment his hand touched the barrier, Ben's mind exploded with sensation. He could feel the entity beyond, vast and ancient and hungry. It pressed against the barrier like water against a dam, constantly seeking weakness, constantly probing for cracks. And it spoke to him. "You don't belong here," it whispered. "You're just a janitor, a nobody. These aliens are using you. They don't care about you. They just need someone to sacrifice so their princess doesn't have to." Ben gritted his teeth. He could feel Zarathai beside him, her hand also on the barrier, her will adding to his. "You could have power," the entity suggested. "Real power, not this servitude. I could show you how to take what you deserve, how to make them respect you instead of using you." "No," Ben said out loud. His voice was steady. "Why do you refuse? What loyalty do you owe these creatures? They would never do this for you." And that's when Ben understood something. The entity was wrong. They would. Maybe not all of them, but some of them. That cargo captain, Rita, who had risked her ship to save strangers. his mother, who had worked double shift to help patients who couldn't pay, Kira, the servant girl he protected, who had visited him 3 times during his week of decision to thank him and ask if he needed anything. The galaxy was full of people trying to help each other. Not always succeeding, not always getting it right, but trying. That's what the entity couldn't understand. That's what it had been imprisoned to prevent it from destroying. Ben thought about his mother's hands, worn and callous from years of work. He thought about coming home from school to find her making dinner for their elderly neighbor who couldn't cook for herself anymore. He thought about her telling him, "We take care of each other, Ben. That's how we get through this life." He felt his intention solidify into something clear and unshakable. He wasn't here for power or recognition. He was here because someone needed help, and he could provide it. Simple as that. The barrier suddenly flared with brilliant light. Zarathai made a sound of surprise. Ben felt it too. The barrier was strengthening, not just holding steady but actively growing stronger. The entity recoiled from it, its whispers fading into silence. "How?" Zarathai started to say, but she could feel it through their connection. Ben's straightforward, uncomplicated determination to protect life simply because life deserved protection. It wasn't conflicted by ambition or calculation. It just was. And somehow, that purity of intention was exactly what the barrier needed. For the first time in 50,000 years, the entity stopped pressing against its prison. It withdrew into the depths, unable to find purchase in the simple human conviction that helping others was just the right thing to do. Emperor Thoran, watching from the edge of the chamber, felt tears running down his face. "It's working," he whispered. "It's actually working." The ceremony lasted 3 hours. When Ben and Zarathai finally stepped away from the barrier, both were exhausted but the connection held. They could feel it, a thread linking them to the containment field, a responsibility they now shared. News of what had happened spread through the galaxy faster than light-speed communications. A human janitor had become guardian of the galactic core. The barrier was stronger than it had been in recorded history. The entity had actually retreated. Ships from 100 worlds arrived at the Valorum Empire, their leaders demanding to understand what had happened. Scientists wanted to study Ben. Philosophers wanted to interview him. Military strategists wanted to know if his human compassion could be weaponized. But Ben just wanted to go back to work. "I'm still a maintenance guy," he told Zarathai 2 weeks after the ceremony. "I don't know how to do royal stuff. I don't know politics or diplomacy. But I know how to fix things that are broken and clean things that are dirty. Can I just keep doing that?" Zarathai smiled, a real smile, free of the weight she carried for so long. "You can do whatever feels right to you. That's the whole point." So Ben Torres, guardian of the galactic core and consort to the Valorum throne, went back to maintenance work. He still wore his uniform under his ceremonial robes during official functions, which scandalized the court but delighted the palace staff. He still helped other workers with their shifts. He still fixed things that weren't technically his job. But now, when he worked, people watched. Other species started paying attention to humans, not as primitive newcomers with basic technology, but as a species whose ordinary members carried something extraordinary in their hearts. The capacity for simple, automatic kindness. Trade delegations from Earth found themselves treated with new respect. Human workers throughout the galaxy discovered that their employers suddenly valued their input. Parents from other species started teaching their children about the human way, the idea that helping others wasn't weakness but strength. 6 months after the ceremony, Ben was cleaning the observatory deck when he found Emperor Thoran standing at the viewing window, looking out at the stars. "Your Highness," Ben said, starting to back away. "Stay," Thoran said. "I wanted to thank you. My daughter smiles now. Really smiles. I hadn't seen that in years." Ben set down his cleaning supplies. "She carries a huge weight. I'm just glad I can help share it." "You do more than share it," Thoran said. "You transformed it. The barrier is stable for the first time in my lifetime. Zarathai will live a full life instead of sacrificing herself. And you did this by simply being who you are." "I'm just a guy from Arizona who mops floors," Ben said. "No," Thoran replied gently. "You're the man who saw what needed doing and did it. That's not just anything. That's everything." Later that evening, Ben and Zarathai stood together on one of the palace balconies. Through their bond, They could feel the barrier holding strong, the entity quiet in its prison. The galaxy was safe, at least for now. Do you regret it? Zarathai asked. Giving up your normal life. Ben thought about it. He thought about his small apartment on Oath, his plans to save money for school, the simple life he'd imagined for himself. Then he thought about the children he'd seen playing in that park, the hospital where 30 species worked together, the cargo captain who had risked everything to save strangers. My mom used to say that a normal life is just noticing what needs doing and doing it. He said, this is just a bigger version of normal. Same principle, bigger community. He pulled out his phone. Somehow it still worked as far from Earth, and queued up some Mozart. Besides, he added with a grin, the commute is terrible, but the view is amazing. Zarathai laughed, and somewhere in the depths of the galactic core, the barrier glowed a little brighter, powered by the simple, stubborn human belief that taking care of each other was just what you did. Not because it was heroic, not because it was special, just because it was right.